With 2023 just starting, we should look at some of the biggest stars in the UFC, along with some former champions. Not just that, but some of the biggest names in the sport may be retiring. Is 2023 the year we get to see some fan-favorite fighters leave? Let's dive deeper into what we know, starting with Shogun Rua, former UFC light heavyweight champion. Right now, there are a bunch of fighters from the UFC who will probably end their careers, which is only natural. But can we expect some of them to hang up their gloves in 2023? Admittedly, we've seen many fighters try to hang on for longer than they should over the years, so many of the stars we talk about in this video may end up doing that in 2024 as well. Despite that, they're probably going to have to put their careers to an end. Let's look at 5 fighters from the UFC that we may see for the last time in 2023. The first out of the bunch, the former UFC lightweight champion Shogun Rua, has already announced that he's planning to retire. In the announcement, he said that he plans on retiring from the sport after his eagerly awaited fight with Ihor Potieria, which will take place in January 2023. The fighter turned 41 years old in November 2022, and for the past few years, he has been slowly making his way to the end of his road. On the other hand, 2023 is also the year that marks 2 decades for him, ever since he first showed up in Pride, the very same promotion in which he made a big name for himself. Not just that, but this year also marks 13 years since he knocked out Lyoto Machida and won the gold title. Coming up, more on Rua. It's safe to say that the Brazilian hasn't been performing as he used to in recent years. Ever since the start of 2019, he's managed to win only a single fight in which he edged out Antonio Rogério Nogueira, his old rival. Since then, he's been on a losing streak that continues to this day. Though the fighter has also taken loads of damage over the past few years, along with a bunch of serious surgeries that he's had to deal with, we can say that it might be time for him to step away. The fighter probably should have considered ending his career much sooner. As things are right now, he might end up losing the fight against Potieria, suffering a 3rd loss before he steps away from the sport for good. But that's not all, and the fighter has such a bunch of memorable moments as well, especially the time he fought against Dan Henderson, considered one of the best UFC fights of all time. He proved everyone wrong and defeated Machida in a rematch in the first round to win his UFC championship. Next up, Robbie Lawler, former UFC welterweight champion. We've got another former UFC champion on our list who could end his career in 2023. This fighter is none other than Robbie Lawler, the welterweight king. Deemed with the title of Ruthless, Lawler was once thought of as the most feared fighter in the entire promotion's roster and held the same title from 2014 to 2016. Not just that, but he also defended the title in classic fights against fighters such as Rory MacDonald and Carlos Condit. However, like Rua, the fighter has fallen off hard with time. From the last 6 fights he's had, he's only managed to win 1, as he defeated the admittedly aging Nick Diaz back in 2021. Though, more recently, he went through his first defeat by a knockout since 2016, unfortunately falling to Brian Barberena. Before that fight, the fighter made some heavy claims that he wouldn't be retiring soon, especially since he was more than able to hold his ground against some of the best fighters out there, at least during training. As a matter of fact, he was supposed to be in another fight at the end of 2022, but things changed when he suffered a bad injury. Despite all of that, could this finally be the year that marks the end of the road for Ruthless? It's certainly a possibility. The former champion had a super disheartened look after he lost to Barberena, and just one more defeat, especially if he stopped, could mean the end of the line for him. Additionally, more on Lawler. Admittedly, the fighter doesn't really have a lot left to prove, especially at the age of 40. Not a lot of fighters have managed to take the same kind of damage he has taken over the years. Keeping that in mind, hanging his gloves up if he loses another bout might be his best decision, though the Ruthless has had some incredible fights in his career, such as his fight against Matt Lindland in 2010, making it one of his best fights because of how quickly and easily he was able to knock his opponent out. He is known as the kind of knockout who's feared for finding the perfect openings early on to knock his opponents out, and he did that in his fight against Melvin Manhoff in 2012. The entire fight seemed to be going in Manhoff's favor, but one opening was all it took for Lawler to knock him out. Let's talk about Andrei Arlovski, former UFC heavyweight champion. If we ignore the hiatus he took from 2008 all the way up to 2014, Andrei Arlovski is probably the longest tenured fighter in the entire roster of the UFC. The former heavyweight champion first popped up in the octagon with a debut back in 2000, but now, since he's 43 years old, could the Pitbull finally be ready to end one of the longest sports careers out there? It's certainly possible as we head into 2023. The fighter still seems to be in amazing shape, especially considering his age, but it's safe to say that his skills aren't what they once used to be. Not only is the fighter much slower than he used to be, but he also gets tired much faster, and he isn't that durable anymore. At the same time, the Belarusian fighter can easily overpower less talented or less experienced opponents even now, as we got to see from the fight streak he had against 4 opponents from 2021 to 2022. Similarly, should he retire? But when he's put against fighters that hit much harder though, he tends to struggle a lot, such as we saw in his fight against against Marcos Rogerio de Lima back in October 2022, which ended in a loss. In such situations, yes, the fighter could still come on and keep on fighting for a little longer. That is, if the UFC and Dana White are happy with him fighting opponents that are at a lower level. The fact remains that he's not really going to get younger, and at some point soon, he's probably going to hang his gloves up and walk away from the sport. Another huge loss similar to the one he suffered against de Lima could be a huge sign for him to retire for good, and that loss could happen in 2023. Moving on to Conor McGregor, former UFC lightweight and featherweight champion. It would be a huge loss for the UFC if McGregor did retire, but it wouldn't be the biggest surprise if we saw him walk away from the sport in 2023. Given the title of the Notorious, McGregor is still one of the biggest stars that the promotion has to offer, and admittedly, no one can bring in fans the same way as the Irishman can. But after his fight against Dustin Poirier, in which he suffered a super serious injury to his leg back in 2021, many of us have started to question just how much fight this star has left in him. Though from recent reports, the Irishman is planning to come back to action again in 2023. He could in fact find himself returning on track if he manages to pick up a win in his first match, since he got a stoppage in 2020 over Donald Cerrone. But on the off chance that he ends up defeated in his first return fight, is there really any reason for him to continue competing in MMA? The fighter has already established an incredible legacy, especially since he's the first fighter ever to have 2 titles in the UFC at the same time. What's more is that he managed to make a boatload of money over his career, mainly because of his boxing match against Floyd Mayweather. Keeping that in mind, it's super likely that if his return fight doesn't go according to plan, we could be seeing him in the promotion for the last time, and maybe in MMA too. Finally, Tony Ferguson, former interim UFC lightweight champion. If any fighter were to end up on a losing streak this long, they'd be in danger of being cut out from the roster of the UFC. But the promotion is always keen to keep its former champions along with it and allows them to choose their fate themselves. We could see the same happen with Tony Ferguson, the former interim lightweight champion, who has now been on a super long losing streak with 5 losses in a row. The fighter has been in the lightweight rankings for the past 7 years, but the end of 2022 brought an end to that, as we saw the former champion missing from the very same rankings for the first time in almost a decade. So could this lead him to hang up his gloves in 2023? In a super intense and insane tweet from back in October, the fighter suggested that he had no plans of retiring yet. But despite that, it's pretty easy to imagine him changing his plans if he loses a bunch more fights early this year. After all, we have to consider that he's now 38 years old and has had a history of suffering from pretty bad mental illnesses, damaging his health. Not just that, but we also know that he has a pretty young family waiting for him outside of the promotion. With all that said, it's very likely that he will walk away from the sport if he goes through another defeat in his losing streak. That's a wrap for this video. What are your thoughts on the fighters? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.